Not the purest sansei, because my father was born in Japan. Mm-hmm. But usually when the mother is a nisei, we're referred to as sansei. And just for the fun of it, we call ourselves 2.5. But anyway, we are, how should I say, classified as sansei. The yamakis come from Shigaken, and it's basically agriculture. A lot of agriculture was the line that the people, or the sons, and particularly the sons, were expected to carry on from their parents. But slowly, I think my grandfather must have been pretty wise, because he told the 3 sons, the future is in the west. You gotta cross Pacific and go west. So my father's oldest brother came first and worked at Hastings Mill and all that, and he just loved it. Then he got word from his uncle that you gotta come back because you're the oldest son, and we gotta get you married. And so he said to my father, who's the second son, his name is Junzo, that you go to Canada, go to Vancouver, and he said, don't ever come back to Japan to marry a girl from Japan. He said, I want you to find a nisei so that you will feel more settled. And that's where your future is, in Canada. That's the beginning of the Yamake family. Now, Dad graduated agricultural college in Japan, but he couldn't put that to use here. So a family friend from Japan said, well, why don't you go into pastry making? And Dad thought, pastry making? And he said, well, if that's the only way I could survive, oh, sure. He said the next problem was, who would marry a pastry maker? So he said, it was matchmaking in those days. So, oh, there's a woman who was looked after by an English colonel's family, so she must know something about baking. What about her? You know, going back to why did Mother stay with this English colonel, is that her mother at age 33 died in that pandemic of 1918, and so she left 6 children at age 33. So the mother, the oldest daughter, and the next son, Grandpa left them in Vancouver, and he took the other 4 to Japan to be put into foster homes amongst the relatives. So my mother feels that she was very fortunate to be with this, the English colonel's family. They're very kind to her. She says she certainly learned a lot. There used to be a lady who used to do the baking for the family, traditional English, I guess, way of running a good household, so to speak. So this lady would come and make bread and buns and pastry and cake, and she used to watch her, you see. And she was with them till she was 21, when she married my father. So the matchmaker came to Grandpa and said, there's a Mr. Yamake who needs a wife to run Kasuga pastry shop, and we hear that your daughter knows how to bake and all. So Grandpa said, well, you're of a marriageable age too, so that's a good match. She said she just sort of, like in the old-fashioned days, she just lifted up to her mother was gone, lifted up to her father and maybe 1 or 2 uncles. So what do you think, is this a good match? They said, yeah, it's a good match because you surely won't starve marrying a pastry maker. And then she said, I said, did you meet him? He said, no. Did you see his photograph? And she said, yeah, I guess I did. The matchmaker said, this is what he looks like. So she said, her younger sister said, look, sis, I'll go down to Powell Street and check up for you. We'll go to the store and find out what he looks like. So Auntie Frances went down to Powell Street and came back and told my mother, not a bad-looking guy. So she decided to marry him, and she didn't actually see him until the day she married him, going down the aisle. She said, that's the way it used to be. You listen to your parents or immediate in-law, and you go by what the matchmaker says. So she said, and you know what my father said? I think he was joking. Oh, I thought I was marrying your sister who is prettier. So that's how their marriage started. And real good parents to my brother and my sister and I. Solid family. So we're very thankful for that. Yeah, and with Mom having that English, slightly English accent to her and mannerism, Dad was quite happy with that too. So I was born in General Hospital, which is rare because most mothers had midwives deliver the baby, but I was born at General Hospital, August the 30th, 1929. And after 10 days, I was brought to 359 Powell Street, where my parents had the manju and confectionery store. Mm-hmm. And I lived there until evacuation, all of that 12 years. Yeah, we were the only Yamakis. Even after evacuation, we would check, and no Yamakis. And my brother's an only son, so he's taken the name. So I had a very unusual name to begin with. The only one in Canada. So I'm the one who literally lived upstairs of the store, playing a tea party with my sister in the breezeway. It really didn't strike me, except that, oh, you have a mother who speaks with a slight English accent. Surely you also speak with a slight English accent. That I used to hear. And the way we were dressed, of course, as one of my girlfriends said, you know, Shirley, we used to call you Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth because your mother dressed you like an English child or a princess. So those are the things that made me realize that there might be a little bit of a British influence in my life. It was my first 12 years up to evacuation. When I think about it, it's so packed with different things that I did. Not just to go to English school, Japanese school, piano lessons, Carnegie Center's faithful member. Always went to visit the mummy. And to see the Asahi baseball team come and open up their clubhouse in the same building as mine. And the first Japanese store, the department store, being built right next door. So I was right in the hub of all this activity. And anyone outside of 300 block Powell Street, we thought that, wow, we're the jet setters. So much action going on 300 Powell. We were never allowed to go downstairs in pajamas or whatever, in those days, 90s. We were disciplined to be dressed. Go downstairs, and the first thing Mom and Dad expected the children to do is to go to the family shrine and just simply bow our head and in our heart promise to be a good person for the day, you know. And then Mom would have breakfast. And here is something that's quite different from what I hear from my girlfriends. They usually were fed rice gruel because the mother came from Japan, but my breakfast would be cocoa and toast with peanut butter or something on it. So a good way to start school. So then we trot off to Strathcona, sometime with friends. Yeah, most of the time 2 or 3 of us would be together. We walked to Strathcona. According to Statistic Canada, the most numbers of Niseis were born in Canada. So the classroom from maybe 1 division, at most 2, was increased to 4 divisions to accommodate us. So there were a lot of kids at school, mostly all Japanese and Chinese. At Strathcona, we were not allowed, but we were told not to speak Japanese. So we go to the Japanese school, and we're told that don't speak English, use your Japanese. And That's a good advice because we became bilingual quite young. And when I think about the kindergarten that I went to, the Buddhist kindergarten, I think in our parents' wisdom, they had one Caucasian teacher and one Japanese teacher. So the English language became very familiar to us. Instead of having two Japanese teachers, our kindergarten had one Caucasian and one Japanese teacher. Very closely knit community. And as far as I know, Dad and Mom and all the neighbors had a very good relationship. And they also sort of looked after the children too. Being really feeling that I was a city person, I still feel that way. Good teachers in those days were the principal's wife would, in rotation, invite us to her home for sukiyaki dinner, and that's where we learned how to behave ourselves. Or the piano teacher, Miss Naka. Once a year, she would take us to Rose Restaurant. I think it was called Rose Restaurant on Granville for the first, so like the first time the strawberry shortcake was made available to the customer. And it was simply her way of teaching us how to use the dessert fork and keep your elbow off. But she said that she didn't have too much problem with my sister and I because we'd already been trained in the English mannerism at the table. Sometime after I became about 8 years old, there were 1 or 2 deliveries to be made nearby, and that was my chore. Then, of course, I'm probably the only one who delivered manjo to the Black Dragon Society. And I remember Mr. Mori being such a gentleman. And even at that age, I thought he's not very tall, and he wasn't. But when I look back, I think, he treated me just like he would an adult. He never left it for one of the girls to just pick up the order that I took to the door, but he would always come out to say thank you, pat my head, and then give me 25 cents. And that was a huge amount of tip, because 4 of those would meet my budget to go to Exhibition Park, Peony. So he initially did a lot of good for the community too. Mind you, had to pay, but the merchants paid him to make sure that the hoodlums didn't come to disturb their business. If there was an unsavory character and the police didn't know what to do with the fellow, Mr. Mori would simply arrange to have the person deported to Japan and let Japan worry about problems like that. So he sort of kept the community clean in a sense. But then on the other hand, this is what I hear, if a person was just not the kind of person that should be around in the community, well then he would simply have it bumped off by one of the henchmen. Mm-hmm. So that's my memory of Mr. Mori. It's December the 7th, and it was a Sunday, and I come home from Sunday school, and I never did ever see my father almost clinging on to the radio. And in those days, not everyone had a radio, so 2 or 3 friends or merchants around our store came, and they were just glued to the radio, and I couldn't understand why everything was so serious. And then I overheard them, or they were talking about this war, what's going to happen to us. So that was the whole December 7th. Japanese school was closed down immediately. The Buddhist ministers from the Buddhist church was temporarily sent to Marine Building for not a jail, but a holding cell. Mm-hmm. So the Japanese church closed, the Japanese language school closed. And Strathcona kept it open for the Japanese Canadian children, but very quickly the classroom dwindled because one by one the family would be sent away. And I think the most traumatic thing was that bachelor sons were usually the first to be chased after by the Mountie, and they were sent to Shriver or one of the work camp or whatever you call it, and in Revelstoke too, to railway work. So the young men were really running around. Some of them hid for a while, but it didn't work. So they were all rounded up. And then they noticed, of course, to say that you have to evacuate from Vancouver with only one suitcase each. And so this is where self-supporting helped, because Dad was able to, hire a transfer. And that's what the albums that I have now survived, because most family couldn't take albums of all things, And some of the fathers couldn't even take their home brew. The bottle was too heavy and breakable. So they buried it in the basement, apparently, hoping that it would cure age by the time we got back. Well, it never happened. We didn't come back. Everything was upside down. And then suddenly we see our Chinese friends wearing a button that says, "I am Chinese." And we thought, oh, what a change. And one by one, the stores were closing down, and the family started being moved out. When just after December 7th, the first people that were moved from the coast were the Japanese in Vancouver Island, like Cumberland, Duncan, Salt Spring Island. So they were brought to Hastings Park, and some family could afford it, so they rented rooming houses behind the stores on Powell Street, and this is where we got to know some real nice kids, And so for us, it was kind of exciting, because these kids are, well, from the country and different. And so those are the things I remember. The mass, activity going on, and no Japanese school, no church, which was great. It's a holiday for us. And caution, like don't go to downtown stores because of the discrimination. And I think probably around that time, the parents felt that we shouldn't even go to Carnegie Center on our own, or the assumption that we should be as unnoticeable as possible because of the discrimination. You know what? They said that it was natural that people discriminated us because it's ignorance, they told us. And I often think about that. If that had happened now, certainly we wouldn't have to evacuate because of the massive protest. Also, by this time, so many have gone to Japanese restaurants, and they know what sushi is. But in those days, no one really knew about sushi. And so I think Mom and Dad were very wise. It's pure ignorance. And some of the politicians who were thinking about only themselves. That piece of promo for this politician, I've donated to the museum, No Japs. And that was his motto, a platform he used to become re-elected. But somehow, we were told that this is natural and that we have to accept it, and that Dad will make sure that we're together. Some of the kids where their fathers went to the road camp, all of a sudden just moms looking after the kids. That was very hard on them, but we were spared that. I don't remember Dad specifically explaining to me how he felt about our future on Powell Street, but he took it for granted that this war, and his friends said the same thing, is going to change the world. And things will never be the same, even in a small community like the Powell Street Japanese town. And so what my father did was, he was renting the store from a Japanese man. But he just felt that there was no point in selling, showcases and things like that, refrigerated. What he did was just locked up the store, and we moved. And what I missed the most was my piano, and I used to have a nightmare about that for years. So a few years after I was married, he told my mother to call me and say, tell Shirley I'm going to end her nightmare about losing her piano because I'm going to get her one. And that's the piano that's sitting in my living room now. And there's a picture of me and my sister playing the piano too. But anyway, who knows? Is it because my mother had an opportunity to find out what English people can be like? And this colonel and his wife was obviously a very enlightened people. We had no fear of what we call hakujin, the white people. But I know a lot of my friends' parents were wondering how are we going to be treated. But Mom and Dad both felt that a decent person, irrespective of their race, would see the the destruction of a war, and that they wouldn't really personally persecute. December 7, and there was talk about everyone having to move. Most of the families were supposed to be moving up from Powell Street anyway by March. Then I came down with a very severe pneumonia. And so Dr. Uchida, the kind family doctor of ours, said, oh, Mr. Yamaki, I'll write a letter to the Mountie and tell them that I don't expect Shirley to live. So give Mr. and Mrs. Yamaki a little bit more time. Shirley will pass away, and they will cremate her at the Vancouver crematorium, and she will evacuate with the family in an urn. Yeah, so Dad took the letter, and the Mountie, or whoever it was, felt so sorry for him. He said, I hope your daughter will recover. And Dad said, well, if a doctor writes a letter like this, we don't expect her to survive. And I did. So I got better and better, and then so we evacuated to our chosen place by May. By that time, Powell Street was pretty quiet. So many people had moved out. When the government said that we're going to evacuate you, and you know what my father said? I don't want to use the money from the Canadian government or taxpayers' money. I'm going to go self-supporting. Because he said, I have just enough money to move the family. One, so that we would not be a burden to Canada using the taxpayers' money. And secondly, he said, I don't want the family to break up, such as I would be sent to the road camp, Mom and the children will be sent to a farmer's home or something in the Okanagan. So he said, for those two reasons. And he said, I don't want the government to support me. He said, they're in enough trouble. So we're one of the, quite a few people went self-supporting. But then you see, this is where Mr. Morita sort of comes in. He, from what I'm told, he sort of had a control of these centers. And you sort of had to get his approval to be able to move into a center like that. And I thought, maybe that's true. Mr. Yamakis used to send her little girl to deliver that manju for heaven knows how long, when other people just didn't want to even come near the stairway. So maybe he remembered that, and maybe this was a favor he returned. Sure, the Yamakis can go to the interior. You still have to pay your way, though. Yeah. And that's what I gather happened. We got on a train, that Kettle Valley train. It takes forever. And I remember my father was so worried about us, and don't talk out too long, because there were military men sitting in the train, but no one said anything to us. And we safely got to Chase, which is past Kamloops. And we went to a little place called Magna Bay, which is now quite a camping site. And I think we stayed with them for about 10 days or 2 weeks, and both couples were so gracious, sharing the food with us. And the boys were ecstatic. Gee, we got 2 girls in the family. 10 days in Magna Bay. Dad had asked the police, or what is it, the provincial police, Mountie. I've just taken my daughter out of the hospital, showed them the letter from Dr. Uchida, and so I must be somewhere near a road, like the highway, or a train, so that in case she needs help, we could take her to Kamloops. So lo and behold, a few days later, the Mountie came and said, "Oh, Mr. Yamaki, we found a house for you. It's not a house, it's a shack. It belonged to the blacksmith." But Mr. Johnson, I think his name was, had to go to Vancouver because his wife has cancer, so the blacksmith shop is empty, and would you like to take that? And the Mountie said, he said the horses used to come in there, so Dad said, "No, not to worry, I'll try and fix up the living quarter." And he did a nice job of that. So we moved to Notch Hill, just several feet away from kind of the highway. Yep, and we were only a few feet away. And just a block and a half away from the station, where we used to see all the military fellows go by on the plane, on the train, and we used to see lots of soldiers and in the army, particularly on those big army trucks, and they would roll right in front of our house, and we used to laugh about that. And that strict rules and regulation made up in Vancouver doesn't seem to be supported or even paid attention in the interior. They just sort of judged you by who you were. So we were very fortunate. Mr. Christopherson was the first one who came to see us. He said that the community of maybe about 20 families were so worried that a Jap family was moving in. So they told them to take a look at what we look like. So he said the day the truck came, he said he hid behind one of the trees. And he said, "I brought my shotgun too." And he said, "I was so amazed to see this. Oh, your mother in a hat and gloves, and two little girls so nicely dressed, and the little boy so cute, and your dad in a three-piece suit." So he went back and told the neighbors that, they looked like they just walked out of the Sears catalog. And then he said he was even more amazed when we spoke English. My mother was forever grateful that we were so graciously treated, no discrimination whatsoever. So Nacho was a good experience. Overnight we're well water and outhouse, so to speak. But it was an adventure. And one of my best Christmases that year in 1942, because we had to leave all the ornaments in Vancouver. Dad said, "Well, you'll have to get busy and make your own." So we had bits and pieces of whatever we can get a hold of. Made all these little things to hang on the tree. Dad went to the back and cut a Christmas tree for us, and that was the most enjoyable Christmas that I can remember. And then I caught a real bad flu. So Dr. Smiley in Kamloops said, "Well, bring her in and we'll check her over." And he said, "I think I'll put her in the hospital for a bit because I'm concerned that it might develop into something more serious." So then the government finds out that there's a doctor looking after an enemy alien, 14 years old or something, and that she must be separated and sent to New Denver, where anybody with any lung problem. And that record is closed because I think they've destroyed it. Anybody with lung trouble must be shipped to New Denver. Well, my father and mother had no choice. And then this doctor in Kamloops bounces into the room with a bow tie. He said, "Shirley, you lucky girl, you're gonna go to Denver, Colorado." I said, "Dr. Burris, this New Denver is holding cell for anybody with lung disease, anything to do with lungs." And he still insisted I was going to Denver, Colorado. So my mother took me, And everybody's healthy. You know, they don't look sick. They're not coughing or anything. Well, some of them, of course, passed away, but later on we found out that it was a couple of fellows, it was a result of their accident, that there was a scar in the lung, and they really should have been treated, but not just left in New Denver. And one girl got pregnant, and she didn't know where to go, so she sought the old family doctor who was a doctor at New Denver. So she had her baby in New Denver, and the hospital wouldn't accept her because she's an enemy alien. So she had the baby in the hallway. And just things like that went on, and we lived through all that. Some patients, of course, basically, see, we didn't have a properly trained technician. So they have this old army machine, and anytime they felt like it, oh, well, she needs an x-ray, so we'd be called in. Or there was one doctor who was well known for being an alcoholic, and he gets this funny notion that, maybe I'll try an experimental thing. So one day I'm called and said, Shirley, we were looking for someone else, but she's not in her bed, so he wants to try and make you better, whatever it was. And I said, oh, so I went. And without anesthetic, he cut my throat, my neck. I could feel the blood moving. And I thought, what in the world is he trying to do? And the stupid doctor later on said that, I just wondered what freezing, what they call a phrenic nerve, might do to a lung. Didn't do anything, just gave me a big scar. When I finally got back to Kamloops, I went to see Dr. Smiley, and he said, you know, Shirley, that is one regret I'll never forget. When they told me that you were an enemy alien, just a 13 or 14 year ago, I should have refused to send you. And then he said, you wouldn't have gone through all that. However, he said, like Anne Frank, and she and I would say, he said, there's many, many sacrifices made during the war. He said, just leave everything behind and go forward and make a life for yourself. That's why I eventually became a manager of a large salon. So for years, people said, we don't understand her because she was supposed to be in bed, and then she finally gets out of bed, trains to be a hairdresser, and then she manages 2 large salons, walking around all the time. And then many, many years later, I had an x-ray done at the Willow, and the nurse came and said, the doctor wants to talk to you. And I thought, holy Moses, you know, now what? So this doctor said, I just wanted to meet you. He said, you look so well. And he said, another doctor and I checked the x-ray. You'd never had TB. So there I was, ready to challenge the world. And my auntie's the one who said that you're still discriminated, you can't find job in so many fields. She said, why don't you try hairdressing? I go clean the shops and they make pretty good money. So I thought, yeah, why not? So then I had to go through IQ test and all that, and they said, oh, she's bright. I came to Vancouver to VVI, and room and boarded at the Sogas. And Mr. Sogas said, Shirley, do you remember Jimmy Kakutanya? And I thought, wow, he's still good looking. But I'm looking at him in a different way because now I'm in my 20s, right? And yeah, he's pretty handsome. So he said he was surprised to see, he told me later, I was surprised to see this little young teenage kid grew up to be such a beautiful looking girl. And then we were married in August of that year. He was a great person to be called his wife, and a lot of his colleagues, real estate salesmen, said, sure, Jimmy, you just picked the right girl though. And he said, yeah. He said, I've been looking for someone for a long, long time. So our marriage lasted 44 years. So my girlfriend said, Shirley, you want to go to work? And I said, yeah, well, I might as well because there's just so much to do in the house. So she said, why don't you go see Lawrence? Surely your family knows the Iwasaki's, and so she said, why don't you go see him? So I went to see him at the Ritz Hotel. And I said, Lawrence, I'm Jimmy Kakutani's wife. That's all I needed to say. You're hired as my assistant. So I got hired right away. And he said almost from the very beginning, he had this idea in his head that I have Shirley now. I will train her as an assistant and will become a manager of one of the largest salons of that time. So he had it all designed for me. I trained well under him because you had to know the ins and outs of hairdressing. And then I had to do all the shopping for the supply. So that was the beginning of a wonderful career for me. And when you put it that it was unique, it really was for a Nisei woman or Sansei woman to be able to run a large salon at the busiest point with the assistants and dispensary leave. I had about 75 under me. Still have reunions with the girls. The girls that I hired as a teenager, they're now in their 60s. I would ever get married again after my first. Then I end up with this guy that I went to kindergarten with, and then his uncle marries my aunt, and we're right back into the family. And so I think it was 3 years ago, there's a big New Denver reunion. The Japanese church in Kamloops decided to have Bon Odori there. So Shin and I went, and we were walking home from dinner, and we went to see the lakefront. And I said to Shin, boy, sometime you should live long enough to have the benefit of having lived a long time, because this road that we're walking, he thought that I will never see this road again because my family's taking me to Japan. I thought that I would never walk that road because I might be dead, And to think, Shin, that after 60 years, we're walking together, listening to Carpenter Creek still trickling down the mountain. I said, isn't it incredible? And it took us sort of out of our daydreaming when one of the couples said, hey, lovebirds, come on, let's get back to the hotel. But that's another incredible, I think, experience that Shin and I had after 60, 70 years. To be able to walk that road, which we thought we would never be able to see it again. But now I look back and I think it was a great experience. And to come out of it without being bitter. And it also motivated me to feel that, well, I'm going to show you guys that I didn't die, that I'm going to make something of my life, as Dr. Smiley advised me. And I don't think I could have asked for a better career, really. So I have no complaint. I think it's important to have this sort of interview and oral history because it gives you the insight into the past. And that leads on to the time of, even back to the Bible time, where it gives you a history of what kind of people we were and all the activity that goes on in our human experience. And that's why I feel that the oral history and filming like this is so important, that just an ordinary person's life can be significant, and that each person has similar experience and similar significant experience to pass on to the future generation. there's a purpose for each of us, and that's why we're here. Then that's why didn't I die when I was supposed to die? So that's how I feel about the importance of leaving something of ourselves. But that's me.